Right, it's about 6 in the morning. It is already a beautiful day, and we are off to find Grain Battery Tower. Is this going to be another situation where I could have parked way closer than I did? Almost certainly. I can think of worse places to walk in the morning. I can see it. I was thinking about walking out to it, and it looks like the tide's far enough out that I could at the moment, but I don't know. Do I really want to be the jackass who gets marooned out there? Nah, that's what drones are for. As you work your way out of the River Medway and find the point where it meets the Thames Estuary, you might spot something a little strange rising out of the sea. Out on the sandbank stands a lonely, rusting structure that, when I look at it, gives me Bond villain who didn't quite have the budget. This would make for a pretty sad little lair. But this strange tower on the Kent coastline was once intended to have a very serious role defending Britain. Now, during the 1850s, Britain was starting to get a little concerned with the French. Nothing new there. But around this time there was a perceived threat, specifically a naval threat. And when they built this tower, Britain had one key thing on their minds, and that was to protect the important dockyards at Sheerness and Chatham. The Thames, as well as being one of the UK's most important trade routes, was also seen as particularly vulnerable. There were the victualling yards at Deptford, Woolwich Arsenal, shipbuilding yards, and various magazines. So it was felt there was a pretty keen need to do something about this, and that was Grain Tower. The original idea being for it to be a gun tower situated just offshore, along similar lines to what were called Martello towers, many of which were constructed along the British and Irish coastlines earlier that century. And they're essentially very thick-walled circular fortresses that had a flat roof where one single piece of artillery could be placed. And Grain Tower, interestingly enough, is actually the last example of a tower of this type to be built in Britain. It's about 500 metres offshore, and there is a causeway that runs out to it from the shoreline, although it's not in the best condition, and you really do have to be there when the tide is at its lowest to be able to use it. But you can get out there. Now, they started building it in 1848, but they had some issues and eventually paused the build on it. And it wasn't until after about 5 years that it then took another 2 years for Lincolnshire builders Kirk and Parry to finish constructing the tower. Basically, they had a bunch of issues because it was so exposed to the elements. Obviously, out there, you can understand why. And during winter, it wasn't the most pleasant thing to work on, so it took a little bit of time. But at the end of 1855, it was finished and handed over to the Ordnance authorities. It did end up costing a little bit more than they'd expected though. It was supposed to cost around £10,000 at the time and ended up costing £16,798, which today in 2025 is almost £3 million. Which actually I think for an awesome weird tower like this is actually a bit of a steal. And as for what it's worth now, it was purchased from the Crown in 2005 and then put up for sale in 2010 with a guide price of around £500,000. The previous owner, a man called Simon Cowper, had said that it just didn't work out well as a home, which a lot of people might think was pretty obvious. Reportedly, in 2014 it was then sold again for £400,000, and then in 2023 it was listed again with a guide price of £150,000, so this thing is a chase to the bottom. Nobody's really interested in it. Let's just say in its current state, it's not really going to make an attractive Airbnb. As for whether it was actually used, it was set up once built to work. It had 3 smoothbore 68-pounder guns on the roof, but almost as soon as it had been finished, a new generation of much more modern, much more powerful rifle muzzle loader guns made it essentially obsolete. And it was never improved to be more effective at defending against that type of weapon. And by the end of the 1850s, the government recommended that all existing forts either needed to be rebuilt or upgraded. And Grain Tower was included in those, but eventually, as always, the cost of upgrading Grain Battery Tower proved too much. And a new fort was built on land, and the existing battery over at Garrison Point on Sheppey was improved instead. It did get its guns improved with some of the newer RMLs, But eventually in the early 1900s, these were taken out and it was turned into a communications tower. And then slowly but surely in the 1900s, as the threat started to come less from big wooden boats and more from smaller, faster torpedo boats, the tower needed to be updated again, and the concrete structure you can see on top was put in place and equipped with 2 quick-firing guns. And this is how it stayed during the First World War, when it was also adapted to be one end of a boom defence across the Medway. And you can still see the iron chain down there at the bottom that would have been stretched from the tower all the way over to Sheerness. The Second World War came around and it got an even bigger gun, a twin 6-pounder quick-firing gun, which meant it needed a much larger, thicker concrete emplacement on top, a taller tower for directing the gun's fire, and it also got that horrible-looking square barrack block on the back. And then eventually, after the Second World War, it was decommissioned in 1956. Now it just sits there. It is technically a Grade 2 listed building now, despite the amount it's deteriorated, and you're not technically allowed into it, but obviously that's not stopped people, and if you look online you can see some incredible pictures that people have taken inside the tower. Definitely recommend going and finding some of those. As for me, I'll just stay back here with the drone for now. And if you've headed out to the tower, as I'm sure many people have, especially locals, then let me know what you thought of it. And here's a little bit of me painting. Don't be too harsh, I'm not 100% familiar with this watercolour line and wash technique, so this is me just kind of winging it really. So are there any master watercolour artists out there? Try not to judge me too harshly. See, I went way overboard on the shadows and reflections there. But hey, it's all about learning. And I think it turned out okay. Just try not to judge me too harshly. So I hope you enjoyed this little tease of me painting. And I'm quite happy with this little idea at the end to add some of that graffiti on there with this white acrylic pen. So hopefully you don't think it's too rubbish. As seems to be becoming the norm now, I'm going to call that a partial success. I think I'm happy with some of the shots that I got, but those fucking birds, man. If any other drone operators, hobbyists out there, know of any way to prevent bird strikes, or at least try and scare them off. I've seen people use reflective tape, but if anyone's got anything that they know works, let me know in the comments, because it's really becoming a problem. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, there's going to be plenty more like this, and I'll see you in the next one.